morning, everyone. My name is Robin Swanheiser. I'm with the Biennial of the Americas, and I have the honor of introducing our second event of the Americas Leadership Forum, The Art of the Protests, Artists Leading Social Change. Before we get started today with our amazing lineup of panelists, we have a poetry reading by Susie Q. Smith. Susie Q is an award-winning activist, artist, and educator from Denver, Colorado, and her latest collection of poems is called Poems for the End of the World, which will be published later this month. Please join me in a welcome of Susie Q. Smith for a lovely poetry reading.
Greetings, Biennial of the Americas. My name is Susie Q. Smith, and I am a poet, artist, activist, educator, and I live in the unceded occupied territory of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne peoples, also known as Denver, Colorado. And I'm really excited that I get to read you some poems today. It is my honor to join you. I'm going to be reading a couple of poems from my collection, Poems for the End of the World, which is not quite as dreary as it sounds. The first piece is pretty short. It's called Mezzo Sopranos Get the Sad Songs. Did you hear the one about the long lines around the gun shop and the sold out bullets and the empty grocery store shelves in the United States? What will happen when our lights are out? I hope we sing like the people in Italy. I only really know two arias, one of which is Lasciatemi morire, translation, Bring Me My Death, so I don't think I'll sing that one, but I'll tell you this, I'll sing before I shoot. I'll sing before I shoot. Ain't never been afraid of heaven anyhow. The next piece I'll read is called Ocotillo. When a seed is planted or buried, abandoned to the soil, it may not know this is a gift. Yes, sis, cry, wail, moan, tear your hair and gnash your teeth, all of that, then wash the dishes. For much of the year, Ocotillo appears to be an arrangement of large, spiny, dead sticks. With rainfall, the plant becomes lush with green leaves. When water is scarce, the leaves turn brown and fall off. Every earth-cracked, thirsty yearning is a seed. Plant it. Let it crane toward the sun and bloom. Do seeds, the small ones, say mustard, get jealous, or pray to become bigger seeds? Do they ever wish they could fill themselves up with air? Is that how they imagine growth? Sometimes I press my fingers toward the invitation of sky and say, yes. Bend my face to the sun and laugh, remembering how I once clung to the shell I believed was me. With rain, we find Ocotillo swelling, blooming open into bloodshot flowers, earning it the name desert coral. Girl, braid your hair or wrap it up and go, even weeping if you must. Somewhere the sun will touch your face. The hummingbird, migrating through the long desert, relies upon the flowers of the Ocotillo for honey nectar. Did you forget? The kindness of wind and its longing for your skin. The unrepentant gaze of desert sky. The rivers that open their mouths to your sorrows, ready to carry them someplace you don't need to go. I reimagine myself daily. I abandon old wounds to the soil until they fertilize it. Everything, even waste, has a purpose. Ocotillo can grow up to 20 feet tall. Some say they can live over 100 years. Yes, sis, live. Let your bare feet sink into the mud. I have been afraid and filled with air before. Did not know I was a small, hard world becoming large as I unfold. And I will tell you, and I will tell me, I forget and forget my way. What is sweeter than longing for loose, escapable soil is to be rooted in rock, becoming honey on a tender tongue. Thank you.
I have the pleasure of introducing you to our amazing lineup of panelists, and they will be with you for the rest of the hour talking about the art of protest. So I'm going to hand it off to Victoria here, Victoria Lyle from the Denver Art Museum, who will be introducing our panelists, and a surprise guest who will be joining us through some pre-recorded video content as well. So thank you so much. And with that, I give it over to Victoria.
Thank you, Robin. I'm delighted to join you all this afternoon. And we will be joined by Pablo Helguera, artist Pablo Helguera, curator Elena Molina, and in a pre-recorded video, artist and anthropologist Celia Gonzalez. As part of this new, ever-shifting pandemic reality, our other panelist, Gerardo Munoz, is unable to join us due to unexpected change in his travel plans, something we will all get used to, I'm sure. I will let each of our panelists introduce themselves, beginning with Celia Gonzalez, an installation and video artist and graduate of the Instituto Superior de Arte in Havana. Celia is currently enrolled in a doctoral program in anthropology at the Iberoamericana in Mexico City.
Hello, my name is Celia Gonzalez. I'm an artist, a visual artist. I'm an anthropology also. All my career, I have been living in Cuba, but now I'm living in Mexico because I start my PhD in anthropology, social anthropology here in Mexico. And most of my career, I dedicate to produce art. Related with research and archive, and related with the relation between the state and citizens in Cuba and repression. So, like an anthropologist, I also combine and really interesting in the relation between art and anthropology in terms of methodological process and how artists are interested in anthropological process, and at the same time anthropologists are interested in the way artists are working with social life and social situations, specific situations. And specifically, I'm really interested in this kind of relations in Cuba and Nicaragua. I'm trying to compare what is happening and what's happened with the scene of art in these two countries that are living in a strong moment of repression from the state, even when they are government from the left. So this, I'm really interested in this combination of repression and this kind of revolution, mythical revolution that are sustaining this narrative about the importance of the socialism, but at the same time are really repressive. So artists in general are trying to respond to this in an active way, but at the same time in this kind of afraid and taking care of themselves. I mean, it's not this kind of activity that you go into the street. It's a kind of activity that you need to think what is sure to do. It's not to put yourself in risk. So what I'm trying to do is to, in some way, to move this discussion about art and anthropology that is taking care in the North, in most of the time in UK and United States, to this region, to Central America and the Caribbean, and to try to do these questions about what art and anthropology need to say to each other in this specific context of Caribbean, Central America, and this moment of repression from the state. So this is my interest in this moment.
Next, I'd like to introduce Elena Molina, who is an educator, a filmmaker, a cyborg, personally committed to empower art production. Elena is co-curator of the exhibition Echándola, a presentation of recent works by the Mujercitos Collective, a Cuban art collective of young artists. The exhibition opens in July in the Chinatown Soup Gallery in New York City. Elena?
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I wanted to say I'm also hosting with Gerardo Munoz an artist talk on the Facebook Live channel of Columna Cultural. The artist talk series is called Firing Line, where we talk with Cuban artists about their practice, their work, and eventually we also talk about, other activities that they realize maybe more socially or politically focused. So this is part of my of the work that I develop in Cuba and abroad with a community of artists that are inside the island, but some of them are also outside the island. So I will say it is, there's mobility right there, which I think is interesting as I think exchange with the world. It's important to be on the world, not just on the island.
Thank you so much, Elena. And next, I'd like to introduce Pablo Helguera, a New York-based artist and educator and a recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship. Helguera's many works and texts have consistently addressed the idea of socially engaged art and the relationship between activism and art. Currently, Helguera serves as assistant professor in the College of Performing Arts at the New School in New York. Welcome, Pablo.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just to add that I've had a very meaningful relationship with Cuba over the years, participating in the 8th and the 11th Havana Biennial, doing projects that involved the history of telenovelas, of which Cuba played a very important role, and as well as doing a series of performances inspired on Baroque music that was also presented at the 11th Biennial. But yes, it's a country of which I've always been in a relationship with as an artist.
Thank you so much, Pablo. I want to mention that one of the inspirations for today's panel is the movement 27N, of which Elena was a part. For those of you not very familiar, I'm just going to give a very brief summary. So 27N, or the 27th of November, refers to the 300 plus person protest that was staged in front of Cuba's Ministry of Culture on the 27th of November, 2020. This was the first time this type of collective public manifestation has taken place publicly in front of this Ministry of Culture. The protest was sparked by the unlawful entry and imprisonment of rapper Luis Otero, one of the founders of the San Isidro movement. 27N and the larger San Isidro movement, founded in 2018, are in reaction to the passage of Decree 349, a law that legalized the censorship of art in September 2018. They mark a watershed moment in revolutionary Cuba's history, a collective awakening of the younger generation to protest cultural, social, and political repression, police violence, and the curtailment of freedom of expression directively and actively. And I wondered, Elena, if you could give us a little bit of a background to this movement.
Oh, well, 27N, or 27 of Noviembre, was an spontaneous gathering outside of the Ministry of Culture after some clash between the police and the state police and a collective of artists in Havana, Movimiento San Isidro. And after a week of clashings, they went on hunger strike. They were surrounded outside their studio and their home for weeks. So it escalated to such a point, to such a situation where everyone, I don't think only artists, but everyone in Cuba and of course abroad as well, were very concerned with the situation. And I think there was this general feeling that the escalation had to stop. Like we needed to do, I was in Barcelona, where I'm currently talking from, but I felt the same. Like we need to do something about this. This needs to de-escalate. It can keep, getting worse. There were several artists, not only from fine art, but like writers, journalists, poets, painters, like friends, basically, most of them personally, my friends too, that were on hunger strike and being surrounded by police and under such a pressure. And suddenly one night, at the height of this situation, the island went off. Internet was cut for everyone for like 50 minutes. I remember being like, I was like getting nuts because I was like, what does that mean? Right? Like, this can be happening. It means something. And after this 15 minutes blackout from the internet, when everyone went back online, I remember seeing my WhatsApp updates states, like just updating and everyone just saying, what just happened? Is this related with San Isidro? What does this mean? Why are they doing this? What is happening? We don't understand. This is crazy. And after that, I think a lot of young people went outside to the Ministry of Culture to ask to the minister to mediate, to do something to stop and de-escalate the situation and represent the interest of the artists involved in this. Like the Ministry of Culture was expected to negotiate with like the Ministry of State Security in behalf or of the artists. But sadly, what happened was the opposite. So after that's 27, and the artists have keep trying to, I don't know, build a dialogue or negotiate with authorities and make them change their position without much success, I have to say.
Following up on that, thank you so much, Elena, for that background. I wanted to ask a question about the role of technology in connecting communities both within the island and abroad, and just technology generally as a tool of protest and resistance globally. And I think this is a question for both you and Pablo, if you guys can take turns answering it.
Sure, Pablo, go ahead.
This is a very big question, and I think it's hard to speak about technology and authoritarianism, without just figuring out the entire history of where it comes from. It's starting with radio and television, the way that it has been employed by various countries, and certainly, like technology has functioned as the voice of the state to promote its ideas and to influence the population, right? And what I think is interesting of the last few years is the role that social media has played in breaking apart that order. And that's what I found really interesting in Cuba as well as many other places, right? I mean, that we've seen it from the Arab Spring and over the last decade or so, that suddenly social media became allowed for forms of organization that were not easily controlled by the state. I've always found it really interesting in Cuba how Cuban artists and Cubans in general have this incredible ability to circumvent the system, right? And to find ways in which they can communicate with one another, they can send their messages across and communicate to the external world. I am very always inspired by the work of Joanny Sanchez, the journalist who created this blog, 14 y Medio, where she, as I understand, she even if they would block her internet, she would find a way to like get information to someone else, who would then in turn give it to someone else, and then publish it in Europe or whatever it was, you know. So I think while we have in the United States and elsewhere a lot of problems with social media, and we have seen how misinformation campaigns, you know, have been used. It also is a place by which information gets filtered and can become used for freedom of expression. So anyway, we are living in this really interesting moment where all these porosities are lying around, and that we're learning how to use them. I don't know if that will continue to be the case, but it's just an interesting moment, I think.
Yes, I definitely agree. I think there was this. I'm very interested actually in my work at the art residency, Art House, that I run, on the intersection of art, technology, and academy also. And in the Cuban experience, what we have seen is that with the increase of penetration of internet to the island, and people having phones and opening social media and social media channels, not only Facebook, but like visual channels as well as Clubhouse or Instagram maybe, or Twitter, what we have been seeing is that professionally, not only by artists, but like independent press, for example, or what we call the independent press, which is basically private press, where there's more information floating by both professional journalists, but also, you know, among people, like personal posts on social media, or even, as I mentioned before, Fighting Line, this artist talk series that we organize with Gerardo Munoz. We host those via Zoom, of course, but like online on Facebook, live on Facebook. So it's not only about activism in particular, although it's very useful, of course, channel of communication during those times. And we were all, you know, online during November 27 and January 27, when there was another clash outside of the Ministry of Cultures with artists and activists. We were all like getting news live, you know, like really seeing what was really happening on streaming via social media, and as well as for example, like on our Fighting Line series with artists talking about their work, their professional interest in production. So you have, you know, you're able to basically build from these two sides, right, and express and support and create your world and the full extent of your practice. That is, I would like to remark, because it's something I think central, that is about art, as they are artists. And what we've seen in front of regulation and legal regulations like 348 is that art will always find a way. So that's why creativity, of course, takes place, and the internet is there, and it's free, and it's cheap. I have to say, it's kind of expensive in Cuba, but still, you know, cheaper. And the important thing is to reach out to, you know, general audience with art production and thought also.
I'm muted, sorry. I wanted to follow up on that. You mentioned the term artivism, which I think is something that maybe not everyone in the audience is familiar with. Elena, can you unpack that term a little bit for the members of the audience? And then I would really love for Pablo to talk a little bit about some of the writings that he's done on the criticisms that have been lodged against activist art in the past.
Sure. It's a term introduced, I think, by Tania Brugueras. So it's the mixture of art and activism. So art activism. And it has been used as a to define this new approach of artists, more directed into social goals, let's say, or legal goals, they say. And what I find more interesting about it, beyond the connection between artists and social causes, is the fact that still art is at the beginning of the world. I will say what I have more faith on is in the fact that artists are still being artists, and they are still gonna be artists after all of this happens and become past. So it's not a transition from, let's say, artist world into something like politics or social, or not necessarily, but just a period. And I consider central that artists are willing to continue to produce art and to continue to address reality from the art itself, from the world of the art, and with the resources and methodologies, and with the inspiration and the values, I will say, of art itself, as the things that they choose to be on their lives. And there is something about the way of life of an artist, the way they position themselves in front of the world, that acknowledge beauty as a main value, as the ultimate thing, and also things that can be translated into, for example, money or value by numbers. So there is some magic, something that is hard to define. I don't know, inspiration, talent, this type of things that I think are very important to define the character of artists. And this is something that politics that can learn from. In society and administration, I think bureaucrats, which is something that we're dealing with in Cuba, bureaucrats, I think, can learn a lot from creativity and from the unexpected exits that artists and inspiration can find for problems, current problems that we're dealing with.
Thank you so much, Elena. Pablo, I feel like this is something that's very near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, no, I think Elena made a really excellent definition of this. Just to provide some context, I think artivism is very much connected with socially engaged art practice, which I have been very involved in over the years. Over the last 2 decades, after 9/11 and the upheaval worldwide that was causing the invasion of Iraq and so forth, I think many of us were really thinking about the art market and the dependence of art making to the art market, and like those mechanisms of validation of art, and specifically art as a commodity. We wanted to make a kind of art that was not dependent on those parameters, and that could simply provide experiences and a form of living and a form of thinking that was not constrained by it being a product. So I think that is the spirit of socially engaged art, which of course connects with the history of political art and performance and all these other things, community art. In the case of Tania Bruguera, which Elena referenced, Tania came up with a term called arte útil. The whole notion that as artists, we should not just be making things. The art should be the thing. Like it should not be a representation of the world. It should really act on the world to transform it. And with that in mind, I think she has always been a big critic of the Cuban government. But in 2015, when she creates a performance that she declares is going to do it at the Plaza de la Revolución, she's arrested before she can simply do this performance where she's going to be in a microphone on the plaza. A whole debate on social media, by the way, ensued, led by some Cuban artists who are pro-regime, basically bad mouthing her and attacking her for I don't know, like just being like a, you know, self-centered and out of self-promotional. So many of us went to her defense to discuss that this was an issue of freedom of expression, period. This was not about, doesn't matter what you think about whether an artist is good or not. This is really about the simple fact that you are not allowed to do anything in a public space in Cuba, you know? And that's where the term artivism was thrown, I think, by many local artists in a kind of in a pejorative way, like, oh yeah, you're sure you think you're transforming the world, you know? And that is one of the criticisms that I find really interestingly thrown at art that is political, or that is socially engaged, or that is artivism or arte útil. That because that kind of work tries to address or respond to social political ailments in society, then the criticism toward it places it in a very unfair position of like, whether if you don't solve that problem, then this is not art, or this is not good art, you know. Whereas other kinds of art that are like more traditional, conventionally work that is exhibited in a gallery never really is put to those kind of demands, you know. So it's essentially a misunderstanding of what this kind of work does, and it's also a misunderstanding of what social movements are about. You know, it's like this is a long process. You know that undertakes, unfortunately, many years and sometimes decades. You know, but progressively. Hopefully changes things for the better. And I think in Tania's case, her initiatives have been very meaningful toward that purpose. Like she created an institute, the Instituto Hannah Arendt in Havana, where they've been pushing for discussions, the readings, and what's most dangerous for a regime, which is information. You know, education and information, like informing people and opening their minds to other kinds of thinking. The possibility that other worlds are possible is extremely dangerous for a government that only wants one monolithic understanding of reality to be like consumed. You know, so anyway, it's just interesting to see how these types of practices are still unfolding locally in Havana and elsewhere.
Yes, I think one of the things that really struck me, and perhaps you and Elena can both comment, is that there seems to be a real shift in the way that I think younger artists are moving away from the subtlety and the subtext that characterized, I think, art in the late 90s and early 2000s in Cuba. Even I think when you wrote about Tania's Tatlin's number 6, the first time it was presented, there was this subtext, right? It's essentially pointing towards Fidel's first speech after the victory, but it's also kind of this open microphone on a platform where anyone can step up and say something is also an acknowledgement that freedom of expression in Cuba is denied, even while Fidel was celebrated for this first big speech. And now even Tania's tactics seem much more direct. And the video Patria y Vida, I think, is a really excellent example. There's nothing left in that video and the lyrics to imagination. This seems to be a real shift in my eyes, but I wondered if you and Pablo, if you and Elena could comment.
Well, Elena, I'm sure can speak to this as well. But I mean, just to share. I mean, I was there when Tania indeed did that Tatlin Whisper piece initially in the Havana Biennial, and something that always struck me and that I felt Cuban artists were always brilliant about, were like they were dealing always, like Tania in this case, with this complicated choreography of censorship, against censorship, where you have to come up with a reading of the piece that is acceptable to the regime, right? Like in this case, this is about Fidel's speech, and we're celebrating Fidel's revolutionary speech and so forth, about peace. But when indeed the peace is really about something completely different, right? So it's a game that that artists and censors have played over the years, and in many cases, artists have actually, pro-regime artists have also played it in a way that they produce work that supposedly is critical of the regime, but really is not, and then you find work that is deeply metaphorical, which I can be really interesting, But I think that sort of game or choreography is now over, and as you say, I mean, like things have come to a point that there's some basic aspects of art making that like of the freedom to make art that is at stake, that it does not even allow for those kind of beautiful metaphors to even be produced anymore. So I think we are in a very pivotal point, I believe, in the art practice in Cuba today.
Yes, I think it's also, in a way, since, always, I wouldn't say, of course, in Cuban's case, but in any case where you have certain power on place and you are trying to deviate more or less from that, you will have to face this kind of situation. Of course, in Cuba case, we have had that for 60 years, and that's enough time. So I guess there have been enough time to, switch strategies several times. And again, I think it's very interesting how artists use, creative ways. And also, I will say ways that are outside of the intrinsic logic of the power system, basically. So this is a strategy that I don't think it is a strategy, I have to say, planned. I think it's just how it goes, how things happen and how artists think and live. So this is I will say, a logical situation. It's just it arise in this way, in which you just find a way to be yourself, do your thing, create what you have to create, say what you have to say, outside of the logics, not in opposition, which always, that also happens. But I think the most interesting instances are when it doesn't exactly are opposed to, maybe the main discourse or the ideological national cultural discourse, which we have in Cuba, but just something that is so out of there that they don't even realize is something that deviates from them at the beginning. So I think these are the more interesting instances of it. Not just that you're, self-censoring yourself or working through metaphors, but when you're really creating something so new and so out of the logics of the system and the power that they first don't see it, and then they don't understand it, and only afterwards is that they realize, oh, wait a minute, this might not be what we wanted to design for our country or our society. As I don't know, we have this new man thing in Cuba. Well, I mean, artists does that, like their work, but Mujercitos is an art collective and a magazine that has done just that. At the beginning, it was about humor, satire, being, body behave and enraged, and then they realize, oh, wait a minute, what they're talking about is we're vision politics. We want to really live in a place, in a world, not only on a country, but just on a level of reality that is about the things that really matter, which is the joy of life, maybe, or knowledge and living for real, how they call it, and certain rigor, like being rigorous with true to ourselves, for example, like just speaking our minds, but not because you told me to shut up, just because this is the way I am, and this is the things that I think, and I want to express myself, whatever, it's not just against you, because you're still you're still a subject of a power if you express yourself based on whatever they, opposing something. The full speech is when you're saying everything that you want to say, I guess.
I just wanted to add.
Oh, sorry.
Just wanted to add one thing, which
Yes.
I think it's really interesting to examine the story of the Decree 349 that was recently created in Cuba, which is, to me, it's like symptomatic of how serious this problem has become for the Cuban government, and the fact that they had to create this decree to essentially establish that you cannot be an artist if they don't give you permission to be one, right? Like this unbelievable idea that making art is illegal, if you don't have an approved artist ID, I guess,
I think it would be really interesting for our viewers to have a little bit of context. I don't know that everyone really understands how dramatic the shift was. I mean, over the 60 years of the regime, there has been always a curtailment of freedom of expression and censorship, but artists had some degree of freedom and mobility prior. And the Havana Biennial, in which Pablo participated several times, was definitely an art world destination. And there was a point of pride, in my understanding, from the point of view of the Cuban government, that they did permit this kind of international movement back and forth between artists and the art world. So this Decree 349 represents a real stake in the sand, if you will, from the point of view of the Cuban government towards artists, something that was building for some time, but really, as Pablo is saying, it just made a real legalized censorship. Would that be a correct assessment in your view, Pablo?
I would let Elena speak to it because, of course, she's much closer to that. But it did seem to me that way. But
sure. 349. Okay. I don't know. Well, I have to say there are several sides to this. First of all, there was I don't know, like on the anecdotal side, I will say most of this was already happening, and it was then just put down on written on a paper. And then what I found more interesting, on the answer to the protests and the negotiations, because that was also a way to dealing with it, between artists that were protesting this law and cultural authorities of Cuba. Basically the Ministry of Culture, Vice Ministry of Culture. What I found interesting on the positioning of the artists was the fact that what they did, again, instead of opposing the law, which obviously, yes, they did, but the more interesting taking of this was because they draft this letter explaining point by point why this law makes absolutely no sense for anyone, not for the government, not for the country, not for the Cuban culture, not for the artists, not for the economy, not for the art industry, for anyone, not for the citizenship. What they did is one main point was no one can say what art is. So this was the main logical fall of the law. Instead of just opposing on logical terms, let's say, what they did was saying, not even us, artists, graduated from the art school, acknowledged with the international legitimacy to talk and to create art, can say, or we don't believe that we can say what art is or is not. So it's a mystery. It's a mystery even for us, and it should remain, and it should be acknowledged as a mystery in a way, or something that is outside of law, of regulations, even government. Just don't mess with it. Stay away. This is not your thing to do. And honestly, no one can say anything about it. You know, it's a space of production, cultural production, or even you know, spiritual production that should be outside of any regulation, any logic, any legitimacy structures, even money, if we have to say that, because it's not, even if there's an industry and a market, it's not the same thing as art. Art is not a production like the goods that are produced inside of. And I think that was very interesting, and it's something that goes beyond the law, beyond even the Cuban situation, and that is very interesting, and you know, food for thought for everyone everywhere in the world.
Thank you so much, Elena. I think one of the questions that has been that was submitted to me was, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but what do you think the end goal is for 27N? What would be a victory? Is the repeal of 349 enough, or is there something broader at stake here?
Honestly, I don't. Well, actually, I have to say that we, and I include myself here, we protested the law effectively, and it was suspended, although it was not, I don't know, like raised or something, but it was suspended, and to acknowledge it has not been applied so far. So I consider that to be a victory, actually. I don't know if a victory, but you know, it worked basically. And I think the arguments were good enough to stop this from happening, and showing that it was just absurd. It was just something that is impossible. You can't, you know, totalize control to such extent, because it's just unviable. And it's not good for anyone. So I think that was good argument, you know, good enough argument for the law to be suspended. And as for San Isidro and 27N, I don't know if there's an end goal that is, you know, defined. There were a list of things that were asked to the ministry or to the government in general. And I guess, you know, the negotiation of those requests that had to do with stop physical repression, stop the police violence against artists and citizens in general. There was a big focus there that I think is very important for the violence to stop. And of course, for the government and the cultural authorities, or any authority, police, I don't know, in Cuba, to change their ways on the ways of the violence, and also to allowing citizens a bigger degree of independence, so life can be managed by itself. And also, like, it's just, we are responsible for our own lives. We don't need to be told what to do, not anymore. And yeah, by no one, not, you know, not the government, not the police, not the capital, no one. Like, we need to make our own. We do that every day. Like, it's just acknowledge it. It's happening.
Pablo?
Well, I can't speak with a lot of knowledge about this, but my impression is that already I feel that the artists of the San Isidro movement and others that are dissidents, that are critics of the government, have had certain successes in showing that by exposing these government's actions, by embarrassing the government internationally, that can put pressure on the government to not go that far. And of course, you know, maybe this is very hopeful, but I do think that forms of repression of the 20th century cannot really fly on the 21st century, especially for a country that is trying to reconnect internationally, that is dependent economically of other countries internationally. That you cannot just be simply a bad actor in the global stage and act with impunity and think that there's going to be no consequences. You know, this is why I think, even though the Cuban government continues to imprison artists and continues to to impose censorship, you know, they know that those actions also have consequences. You know, and I think it might be called comfort, for some, that what this is not really enough, but we can see that there's already like cracks, in the system that doesn't function perfectly. It's not the perfect dictatorship. Like it's not. It's funny to me to see how like I see Tanya's feed all the time on other artists saying like, well, now they're afraid of us. Now like the cops that come to our house just sent there and they don't know what they're doing. Like their own incompetence becomes very clear, and how they're trying to impose censorship. So it's an imperfect system that is under enormous pressure. And of course, I think from this standpoint of the artist, you always see how the effect that repression, but it has a lot of defects, a lot of problems, and those I think are hopefully might spell its own doom eventually.
I would like to say also, like, when we talk about movements in 27-9 or San Isidro as something, it looks like there's this organization. It's not. It's just, I don't know how to say it, but like this spontaneous reaction of people, honest people that are doing their own stuff. And I think this, I would also like to say, like, this this position in front of authorities in the co-option of or the recommendations of how you have to live your life are very relevant currently worldwide, because we are dealing with this, like better or worse, with more control in some parts, less control, and more accountability on others. But in this way, I think, what's happening in Cuba is looked by everyone with interest, because it's really happening also everywhere. So somehow, like, I think we were very outside of the history or the world at some point, and suddenly Cuba has get back into the center of, I don't know, Black Lives Matter and other stuff that, by the way, we're seeing in Cuba. Like, we were watching these things, so probably there's some inspiration there too.
No, I think that's a really excellent point. There is a moment of global reckoning right now. I think the pandemic has been in some ways a catalyst for this. I think we've all had to look internally. We've all had to really refocus. I think, Pablo, you've written about this new focus on the local. And we just have a few minutes, so I do want to wrap up and just ask you both, in this moment of global reckoning, I think, what can we do to support artists, both at home, resisting regimes, and those in the diaspora, working outside to continue this movement of protest and resistance and social engagement?
I'll let Elena speak first.
Sure. I don't know. I will say my own strategy is to defend this space that is not regulated by any kind of authority. It might be academy, it might be government, it might be law, it might be I don't know, some models even. Like, I would like to defend a space where you can make your own decisions and experiment life in a new way. Capital also, like, it's not just everything ruled and already defined, but a space where you can create. And I really like the idea of a desert to be populated, so we can build in and create. And I think artists have a very good talent for that, and that I feel very good about that.
I just wanted to say that, I think as just the general supporters outside of Cuba, it's still very important not to stay silent, to be informed about what's happening, help amplify the voices of those artists who are in the fight, and in the small and in whichever ways one can, and understand that to just basically try to learn as much as possible about the movement, so that you are not misinformed. And I think it's I think in American media, for example, it's very easy to distort like the narrative of what's happening, you know. And there's a lot of like right-wing thinking that, of course, is condemning communism, and it's really not about that. I mean, these are artists who are really for democracy. They're for freedom, and it's very important to understand where they're coming from and what the specific context is. So it's just very important to be informed, to like to double check things, to try to understand. If you don't speak Spanish, you know, like try to go to like credible sources, you know, that can explain the situation for you. But it's ultimately a fight about freedom of expression and about democracy that is true of every country in the world, not just Cuba.
Thank you so much, both of you, for participating. We are really grateful that you were able to come and share with us your views today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Robin.
Thank you guys so much. This is an incredibly enlightening conversation, and I was taking notes the whole time. I think there's some beautiful nuggets. I think when Elena said that art will always find a way, I think encapsulates really what this conversation is about, that the artists are, that, and then I think Pablo speaking to Tania Bruguera and her philosophy with Arte Útil, and how art should add to the world. And I think that that's really what we are seeing coming out of Cuba, and we'll be following this as it progresses. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us here today, and for Victoria for your excellent moderation of this panel. And I just want to say that this is part of the Americas Leadership Forum, and we will have more events this afternoon with an upcoming panel conversation on U.S. Cuba policy. So it'll be interesting to sort of look at this issue again, also from a very more sort of diplomatic policy perspective, and what is going on in the world of government relations between the U.S. and Cuba. So please tune in with us in 2 hours at 2 p.m. Mountain Time for that conversation as well. And with that, I just want to thank you all again for joining us, and to our amazing panelists for this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you.